everyone, and welcome to part 5 of our localization tutorial series. Let's go ahead and start where we left off in the resource helper, which was at the Android initialize method. I went ahead and created this for you, mostly because it's not easy for me to remember how to actually code all of this. So what I went ahead and did, instead of fumbling over my own words and trying to remember how I actually set it up, is just pasting it in here. Likewise, I'm also going to have 2 methods later that I just paste in here because they're going to be same thing, pretty tedious trying to remember how to do it. So I already tested this code. This code is good. So let me explain it to you real quick. So the very first thing we need to do is create a local file name. It's going to be of the type string, and it's going to equal string.format. And this is where the file format comes into play with the 0 and the 1. These are both arguments that are going to be followed by commas after the formatted string. So the way this is going to read is this file base strings, which is equal to strings, is going to be this first argument. So it's going to say strings dot, and then it's going to provide the second one, which is system culture dot name, which is going to be like EN-US. And that's going to be the second part, dot resources. So that's kind of how that's going to, or that's exactly how that's going to read. And I only wanted to focus on the system culture because this is only going to be initialized when the Android starts, and I want it to be equal to whatever the default language of the app is. Now, you could set it up with flags, and if you do set it up with flags where you choose the language at the beginning and stuff like that, you're not going to want to reference system culture. You're going to reference the default culture and save the default culture every time it's changed in the player prefs. Likewise, whenever you change the culture, you're also going to want to reinitialize this Android, or recall this Android initialize method, because what it's going to do is it's going to create a local file path, which is going to be equal to the resource directory, which on Android is application.persistentDataPath, and then in the resource folder. And then it's also going to have a reference to the file name, which again is going to be specific to the culture that you select. And then the streamed assets path is going to get that exact same file name. So the reason there's 2 separate ones. The streamed assets file, if you recall, is going to be referencing a file path that's going to be inside of a jar file. And then you need to save it to the local disk, or at least that's how I'm doing it. You don't have to, but I am. So what I have here is it says if the file does not exist, for local file path, which is going to be the resource directory, so application.persistentDataPath /res/ the file name. If that does not exist, create the directory, and the directory does not exist, create the directory, which is going to be resource directory, so it's going to create that res folder, and then we're going to do www reader equals new www, and then it takes a file path where the file is located, which in this case is going to be inside the jar file at streamed assets. Then it's going to run a while loop. So while the reader is not done, so while the reader is opening up that jar file, extracting it, so it can read it, and then it's going to convert it to bits, we're going to write all of the bits from that file to the local file path, and the bits that are being passed in are the reader.bits, or bytes. Sorry, my bad, bytes. Okay, so it's going to write all of the bytes from the file to this new file. So it's essentially just cloning the file in a different location, and that's what we need to do, because then later we're going to or if we remember here at the end, so before after the Android initialize, the resource manager is being created at the file, or it's going to be creating a file-based resource manager at the file of the resource directory. So that's going to be within the application.persistentDataPath res folder. So the folder, the directory, all of that stuff, it needs to exist. Otherwise, this resource manager will not work. and this resource manager cannot access the jar file and try to get into it. So make sure you have this if you want it to run on Android. Alright, so the other things we need to do are create private methods. First, we're going to create private static string get string, and that's going to be string key and a culture info. Culture. Alright, so this is just a wrapper method around strings.getString key and culture. So what this really does is kind of eliminates the need for this here. I'm going to leave this here, but this is what sets the default. So if I just did get string, this would work, but it would return whatever the current UI culture is, which is system culture. So we're just going to have it reference culture in general, and I got to have that returned. Okay. So then we need to go ahead and create the other two methods, which again, I went ahead and copied. Now I'm pasting. So let's go ahead and make sure we're using that. Okay. So these are our editor only methods. These are the only time we're ever going to use them is in the editor. And because of that, I want to I wrap it in this directive saying if Unity editor, because if this gets called in the Android or in like the Android platform, it will crash the app. Not necessarily crash it, it just won't execute any code after it. It'll cause like a break within the app, which is really weird. I wish it would just crash it so I know it's not working, but this is how we have to do it. So what it's doing is it's saying that it creates a file stream at the resource directory, and then I don't need that. My bad. This was old code. Okay, so it creates a file stream at the resource directory, but then it also references the file name. So at that specific file, sets the file mode to create, because we are creating the file if it does not exist, or we're over. Okay, so I want you to understand that, or we're overwriting it, or so we are essentially deleting everything that's inside of it and then creating new. So when you do that, make sure you're not just thinking that you're adding to it, because you're not. And then the other thing we need to do is file access.write, because we're allowing the app to now write to this folder. Okay, so we create a resource writer called writer, which is going to be a new resource writer using the same stream, or using the stream that we just previously created here. And then for each key value pair of the dictionary that you pass into it, so you have to pass in a dictionary, not just a single string. So you're not passing in a key and a value with the culture info. You're just passing in an entire dictionary. So it's going to loop through the dictionary, and then it's going to add the resource to the writer. And then once this using statement here finishes, it's going to generate the file and then close the writer. And then once this using statement ends, it's going to close the stream. So that's why I use using statements. It just cuts down on the amount of code that actually gets, or that's actually written here. But all of this only happens in the Unity editor. So if you're not in the Unity editor and you call write strings, nothing will happen because this gets skipped over. Okay, so now let's talk about get strings. So when you're in the editor, let me explain that real quick. When you're in the editor, just create a dictionary of strings for the local or for the language that you're actually working on. So you go into a language, then you create a dictionary that's new, or you get the strings from the dictionary that already exists that's saved into a file, and then add to that dictionary and then save it off once you're done editing the language and all of its values. The reason being is because, again, you're not just adding to it. So that's going to be, all right, so if you're going to be writing strings, you should have a way to get strings as well, is kind of what I was getting at. But either way, so You create a resource set, and resource sets have dictionary entries, so they're a lot like dictionaries already. But this is how you convert a resource set to a dictionary. So you create a resource set called set. You say strings.getResourceSet for the current culture that you're working with. And then these values are create if not exist, which is true. You want to create that if it doesn't exist. And then try parents, which I'm not sure what that does necessarily, but this is how I had to get it to work. Okay, so then you're going to create a dictionary, again, of strings because we're working with strings and not objects. And then the result equals new dictionary. So if set does not equal null, it's just going to return a new dictionary, which is fine, because I'm going to say if I create an editor, I want it to return something, and I want it to return a new dictionary if one doesn't exist already, and then I'll just work with that, and then I'll save it off. So it's going to load once I go into the language, and it's going to save once I leave the language that I'm going to be editing all the values for. Okay, so if the set does not equal null, it's going to go through each of the dictionary entries within the set, and then it's going to add to the dictionary the entry.keyToString and the entry.value2string. The toString method of a string is the string's value. So this should work perfectly fine. But if there's anything that's not in there, we want to convert it to a string. But either way, entry stores an object and an object. It's not a generic type. Okay, so that is the getStrings and the writeStrings method. This video is going to be a little bit longer, but I want to go ahead and first let me go ahead and do this. Okay, I also want to go ahead and provide other methods or overrides for these methods. So public, well, the public versions of these methods, I guess I could say. Public static void writeStrings, which is going to take a dictionary, string, and string, and dictionary. Okay, so this is just going to take a single dictionary, and I want it to write strings, pass in the dictionary, and then pass in the system culture. So that's just going to be the default. If that's all you call, that's the default. Then I'm going to say system language, and if that's the case, I want it to get culture from the language. So you'll see this bit a lot, this get culture language from system language, because Unity uses the system language. Likewise, I can also develop a drop-down menu using the system language enum, which is nice. So I'm going to do this. Alright, so those are the public methods that you need for writeStrings. Now for getStrings, we're going to say public static dictionary string and then let's see, the getStrings requires a culture info, so this one we're going to pass in system language, again doing the exact same thing. getStrings, make sure you have that S on there. Okay, and then we're going to say return getStrings. Again, make sure you have that S on there, and then we're going to say get culture language. Okay, and then last but not least, we're going to go ahead and get string. So we're going to say public static string get string. We're going to just provide a key on one, which will return get string key and then system culture. This is if we want the default system culture to be used. Otherwise, we need to pass in the system language and tell it what language to get it for. So this is really the reason we used a wrapper class as or a utility helper class, as opposed to creating or just using the other, using the resource manager and the resource writer. Yeah, it centralizes all of that logic into a single place, but then likewise we can also put system language in there and have it automatically convert and stuff like that, which is pretty awesome. So that way we don't have to have a reference to culture info outside of this class. We just have to have a reference to system language, which since we're using the Unity engine, that works well in our favor. So that right there is our resource helper class. In the next video, we're going to go ahead and talk about or we're going to go ahead and create a test for this to show that it works. And then we're also going to fix the localized text, which is what we're going to do at the beginning, and hopefully everything goes well. If it doesn't, there might be another video.